the changes that's happened in my lifetime is astounding. And so this was one opportunity that I had to leave something behind. That's what I took away from it. Change is possible and that you can contribute to that.
Welcome back, everybody. Richard Baker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with global environmental leaders, lawyers, academics, nonprofits, government institutions about the work they're doing to make a little bit of progress against the challenges they see in their community, environment, society, or economies. This episode, I'm extremely honored to be joined by Hiroko Muraki Gottlieb, an environmental lawyer whose career spans global businesses, nonprofits, intergovernmental organizations, and academia. With that, thank you very much, Hiroko, for joining us. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am so happy to be here.
So as a starting point, as always, it'd be great to have an introduction to yourself and a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Sure. So, thank you actually for the great introduction that you gave already. But I am a licensed lawyer here in the U.S. I've practiced environmental law for over 20 years. But over the years, I've shifted a little bit from corporate to more in the international global arena, where I work on policymaking for better ocean governance at the United Nations.
What inspired you to pursue a career in environmental law to begin with?
I think as I look back, it did have to do with my childhood. I actually grew up in Japan, so the curriculum was rigorous, but what I do remember most is playing outside. And when I went to college, I started to think about all of the negative impacts that have been destroying our earth. And I started to think about, what can I do to protect the earth better? I figured there has to be something more practical that I can contribute even a little bit. So that's what led me to focus on environmental law.
What's the role of lawyers in shaping and enforcing environmental policies these days?
Policymakers actually want to hear objective information because they don't want biased information because they can't bring that back to their capital. So a lawyer, environmental lawyer, could be that you are providing objective information with options. And that's what I found to be very useful. And as a lawyer, you think about various options. So it's a skill that translates into all these different areas.
So when you're doing that, what are like some of the big challenges you come up against then in doing that work and creating, say, the range of options and being able to couch the right ones? Because you must have, like, let's say you come with five, you must have a favorite. What are some of the challenges to get your stakeholders to either understand, buy into, the work that you're doing? Because oftentimes lawyers are seen as like kind of a back of office kind of thing, like necessary evil, but you're actually filtering all the context into particular actions that can be taken. So what's the challenge of getting those options right and then getting the stakeholders to take action and then to follow through?
When trying to be objective, it is a way to use the skill as a lawyer to ensure that you have the facts, that you have the law, you have the science behind it. And coming up with the options then becomes relatively easy because you're just simply applying the facts to the questions. There could be outcomes that are predictable, and then there are unintended consequences. And that's where the lawyers shine because you can see all of the bits of information and connect the dots and come up with that. So then at that point, you're not making the decision, but you're simply providing the facts. And of course, one could say cynically that we're biased and we already have the answer. We know option A is the right one, but we're providing, other options just for the sake of comparison. The job of an environmental lawyer is to come up with those solid facts that will not be questioned. And the teamwork with those who can provide facts, for example, leading scientists, becomes critical.
So then who are you interfacing with to bring these things together? Who are the people that bring you in the insights, and have that ability to help you understand, like within the context of law or in the laws that need to be created, what are the paths that exist?
So, in terms of the High Seas Treaty, it is very science driven. And the scientists had this negative experience with a previous law, which is called the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol. And the Nagoya Protocol created this permitting system for research to be conducted within national jurisdiction for scientists. And it created in some countries, and from country to country it differs, but some countries created such red tape that it became almost impossible to conduct research in a reasonable time frame. So what the scientists have told me was that that is counterproductive. If the goal of the treaty is to foster science and to foster conservation and sustainable use of this nearly 70% of the biodiversity we have, then science must have space to be able to do that. And because I was looking at it from a compliance perspective, I made sure that I engaged the scientists who may be impacted by this new law. And lawyers have the task, a difficult task, of ensuring that proper or information is collected from scientists in an objective manner, not their biased view that they don't want to be regulated. And also collecting the information from the varying interests of countries and regions and coming up with a way that the ultimate objective of the treaty, which is to conserve and sustainably use this large biodiversity for the current and future generations, can be met. It's not an easy task.
No, it doesn't sound like it. And actually, I want to get into the actual process and like you mentioned that it replaced the previous kind of treaty or convention. What is this? I guess first off, what's the significance of the High Seas Treaty? Like, what is it? Why is it different? Why is it better? And what was the process for bringing it to the UN and ratifying it?
So, the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Nagoya Protocol has to do with what happens within national jurisdiction. And until the countries decided to engage in this negotiation, there was nearly 15 years of studies that were conducted in various ways at the United Nations. So it started out as an idea a little bit over 20 years ago from today, and over studies in terms of what is going on with the ocean, what is going on in terms of the gaps in governance, ocean governance, meaning, laws and policies and so forth, that could require another agreement, another global binding agreement. So the decision to engage in that was a long process.
What are some of the next kind of steps, milestones to bringing this forward?
So the way that the treaty works is that the text was adopted by consensus last June, but that doesn't mean that the treaty is enforced. The treaty says that you have to have 60 parties. And for a country or a region to become a party, a country has to sign it, ratify it, and then deposit that ratified document with the United Nations headquarters. So there are three steps. Currently, we have 105 signatories, which is significant, but we have 15 countries that have become parties. So they have signed, ratified, and deposited. So we have quite a bit of road ahead to reach the 60 parties threshold. Having said that, from my own experience in conducting workshops, and also knowing that there's funding going to the United Nations to do capacity building workshops, and NGOs trying to get countries together, the leadership together to come up with this political will to get things done, are all working in the background right now.
I was gonna say, so as a layman who's outside this, I'm wondering, you got 15 that have gone through all three. You have 105 who've done number one. Why would you do the first step if you don't intend on doing the next two? And what's the process of getting from 15 to 60 in your mind? Like, is it political will? Is it economic realities? They don't have the funding to actually execute. Like, what's the gap? Because I feel like a lot of people, we're outside. We hear that 140 countries came together and signed one document, but then there's like these other steps that people don't follow through. And I'm curious, like, what's behind that gap between the 15 to the 140?
There are several factors why a country cannot move from signature to ratification. Number one is the lack of political will. Number two are the steps that are needed within the country's laws to get a treaty, a global and a binding treaty. I think that's where it's really difficult to get from signature to ratification. Some countries, for example, like the US, has many, many steps along the way, and leadership matters, of course. And and then there are countries, for example, Palau was the first one to ratify and become a party. And in a country of approximately 10,000 people, it was easier to get the president to support this treaty that is going to provide protection. And and also, Palau is a small island developing country, and the ocean is crucial for them. So Palau was right there, president of the country provided the political support, and they just got through it. The second was Chile. Chile is a pretty big country. Again, the political leadership supported it. Chile also wants to house the secretariat of the treaty. So there was that aspect that expedited the process. So each country has their own interest, political support, and most importantly, process that could delay the ratification.
So when you're developing, I mean, I understand the political will and how it breaks down. It kind of frustrates me because you're like, well, why did you sign to begin with if you didn't have the political will? That's one thing. That's more like intention and also the design of politics. But the process is really interesting. It's like when you're developing these treaties and these agreements and you're in negotiations, do you actually go and look at the laws of, say, a country that might be saying, hey, we're having a problem here? How much time do you spend understanding the laws of each of these countries so that you can try and find the white space for everyone to clamor in? Or is the idea like we're just going to do this separate from everyone's laws and then hopefully we can hammer it through over time? Like, what's the best approach you've seen from the lawyer's perspective?
Well, each country has their own legal team for, and it really depends. Like the US has its huge team, Germany also. So all these developed countries have huge teams, and small countries may have one or two. So what happens is that they may, for example, we would provide options. And what each country has to do is bring it back to their legal team and the political team back home, and they have to evaluate the options. So that study gets done internally. But what happens after that is that they will come back and say, well, my country can only support option A because X, Y, and Z. And another country may say, well, we can only support B because of these reasons. And through that dialogue, countries begin to understand what are the common commonalities, and what are the red lines, what are the spaces that they have to be able to negotiate. And a lot of times it's finding that exact space where all the common interests can align to get to the end of the negotiations, and it's really, really difficult.
This was kind of getting me my next question, was the balance between speed and action against challenges that are growing versus the slower glacial pace of something that could be seismic in nature. And you are someone who mentioned that you found a passion. You're also a lawyer, so you look at facts and frameworks and like, how do you find a balance personally when you're like, look, we got big problems, we got to move faster, versus we got to make sure this is right, that everyone's got consensus, because if we get this, and it may take 20 years, we altered everything forever. Like, how do you balance those two things? And like when you're having a frustrating moment because it's not working fast enough, how do you get yourself through that moment? How do you get back to the focus on the words, the negotiation, the facts that you need to?
The most important part about keeping the hope of this end to this lengthy negotiation is that you trust the process, that at 3 a.m. after staying up for whatever 30 plus hours, that that there's going to be an end. And it could be a diluted outcome, but still, we are creating tools that can be useful. And one of the things that was really enlightening was the perseverance of the diplomats. It was incredible. And that's something that I learned over the years. That's something, if I were to go back to the corporate world, that will live within me, and to understand how to bring such diverse interests and differences closer and closer and closer together so that we can achieve the common goal.
So if you were to try and create a process for that, like, you're going to take, if you go back to corporate, you have this new superpower, as it were. What are some core principles to that process of bringing such diverse people together in a non-transactional, let's get it done today type environment? What are some of the principles, the values, the skills that you've learned that you can take with you right now and say, like, the top 2 or 3 things for engaging disinterested or disoriented or fragmented stakeholders?
The most important thing that I found with my work at the United Nations is to come up with that political will. And political will can only, a strong political will can only be developed if there's awareness. So where I would start is to create, well, first of all, I need to understand what the challenges are within this corporation or what the corporation wants to do. And then just study what the impacts are internally and what this company is doing that is having impact externally, and to raise awareness about what the company is doing. And then from there, political will could come together and bring the people together so that everyone in the corporation can speak in one voice. It will be a process and it will be a learning experience for all of us, but it can be done. And I learned that from my work at the United Nations.
Could you do this work without being passionate about the issue itself? So you're working with the High Seas Treaty. Could you be someone who doesn't care so much for the ocean? Like, let's say that, animals is your thing, or the elderly is your thing, or healthcare is your thing. Could you be as effective in this position with that mindset? Or do you really need to be aligned, the tool set with the mission, with your passion, to have the greatest potential impact for outcome?
Wow, that is a very challenging question. Most of the people I know who are involved in from the ocean conservation side or from a scientist side are passionate about what they do. However, when you look at the diplomats, they may have a totally different opinion than what the country is saying, but they still have to represent what the country wants them to represent. And they do a really good job. So it's not necessarily the passion for, let's say, ocean conservation, but perhaps passion for one's job that can get you to a point where you can try to change the world or the law or the policy.
Now, what kept you engaged on this high seas treaty for so long? Like, I feel like it's very easy to come in, do a couple of years, maybe like, well, not making as much progress, taken out. Like, what kept you engaged for so long, and what are you going to take away from this personally, from this experience? Like, what will you look back on and be like, there was some success there was some learnings. Like, what is it you're taking away from this time?
When I got involved was when the countries were ambivalent about this treaty. And I actually personally was ambivalent about this treaty. I thought, how in the world are we going to do this? It seems like an impossible task. But over time, I became so involved, and there were so many different pieces to the puzzle. And I understood that I had a strong role to play in bringing people together, bringing ideas together so that we can reach the consensus. And it was an exciting work. And it was, of course, the process started, nearly 20 years ago. But when I got involved, it is when the negotiations actually started, the preparations for the negotiations. So I grew up with it, and I wanted to see it through. I wanted to be there when there was going to be this, clapping, and people were crying because not because they had been up for 3 nights, but 3 days, but because everyone had put so much into it. Many of us have children, and we wanted to make sure that we wanted to leave some tools that they can use because we created this problem. Really, the changes that's happened in my lifetime because of what I've done is astounding. And so this was one opportunity that I had to leave something behind for a child and for all of the future generations. So that's what I took away from it, that change is possible and that you can contribute to that.
So following up on that, what are some next steps that you're looking at in terms of using, the skill set that you've been owning over the last 8 years, but also, the background in environmental law, you've worked in corporate, academic, nonprofit. Like, where do you see yourself going from here? And I'm sure you're going to try and build on this. Like, this won't be like, oh, I did my one thing and check, I'm done. Like, you're going to build, like, what are some ideas for how you build on it? What are some things that you're interested in? And now you've done a global effort, do you want to keep going with global? Do you want to do something more local and easier to get done? Like, how do you view the next few years, the next stage of your career?
That is a very challenging question to answer. One of the aspects of the treaty that really needs focus and a partnership with a corporation is on this IT infrastructure that has to be designed and built. And without it, the treaty will mean that it will not be effective. So I am looking for partnerships. I've already engaged in discussions with a corporation, and that focuses on IT and trying to bring this public-private partnership together. So I believe that is going to be my next step. I'm also looking into ocean security issues and also security of ports and coastlines, and who knows what's going to come from other projects. And what I've experienced is that building on the knowledge that I have and being open to ideas and having the curiosity and the I guess the diligence and the perseverance to learn really difficult topics is going to lead to something more exciting. So I have been very lucky, and I am very excited about what may come in the future.
That's awesome. I actually have a very similar approach to kind of how I look at the future and what I get involved with is like, I call it just be focused on productivity at the end of the day. Like, how can you learn? How can you grow? How can you leverage? How can you, create connections? And the rest will fall into place as it's supposed to over time. As a last question, then, I mean, you're kind of opening yourself up to this. What is some advice you'd give to a young, maybe a young or experienced lawyer who wishes to leverage their skill sets to support and pursue sustainability initiatives? Like, you're talking to students, you're talking to young professionals, maybe you're talking to an early partner, like they want to use their skill set, their passion for whatever issue it is, and start to make a little bit more progress. Like, what are some tips you'd give them about building a career or building some side projects that can help them kind of find balance in both?
It's a question that I get asked quite a bit, especially from students. They look at my career trajectory and think, "Wow, how did you do this?" And it's it's very difficult to say, "Do this." But what I can tell them is that whatever you do is going to be the step for the next step. So even if you have an offer, let's say from a law firm, but you want to work in government. Well, it doesn't mean that you couldn't go and work for the government after you work for a law firm or go in-house. So whatever the opportunity is in front of you, take it. Don't worry that that is going to be it. You're not stuck there, but learn as much as possible from that. But also volunteer. I remember when I started with a law firm, I became involved with the American Bar Association's International Environmental Law Committee. I recently had lunch with one of the members. He was actually the chair of the committee. This is, 2 decades after we met. And we were talking about our career trajectories. And back then, we had no idea that we would be doing this. But both of us, we left the law firms, we left the corporate worlds, and we're doing something totally different now. But we have built on our experiences. So go out there, grab onto that opportunity and build from there. And that's the only advice that I have.